A very good evening to our viewers. Thank you for joining us tonight on the agenda. My name is Toiwon Jabela. Tonight on the platform, we are joined by Graham Hopwood, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Public Policy Research, IPPR, and which recently released a report on the human rights impact of the Fishrot scandal. It has been 5 years since that scandal unfolded, and IPPR is keeping tabs on particularly the impact that it has had on fishermen and their families. Thank you very much, Graham, for making time. If you can give us a sense of what the report entails, especially in terms of findings. We can, of course, get into details later, but maybe at a summary level, what you uncovered.
Yes, so the report that we released actually to mark the 5th anniversary of the Fishrot revelations becoming public knowledge this week. It's called "Right Now I Cannot Survive," which is a quote from one of the interviewed workers. And basically, with this report, we interviewed 90 fishermen, most of them unemployed, who all were either working with NAMSOV at the time around 2015 when NAMSOV started to lose its quotas and they were being diverted illegally to Samherji, the Icelandic company, or later on when Samherji, which had 3 active vessels, closed shop because after the corruption allegations became public and they all lost their jobs. So we've been interviewing, there are several hundred workers, so we interviewed 90 for this report, and we put the findings together in a survey just to find out what life was like, how hard it had been. And the key findings are things like 90% are unemployed and have struggled really to find employment since they lost their jobs several years ago. Most of them, similarly, 90% plus, struggling to get enough food to eat. 53% said on a day-to-day basis they were struggling to get enough food for themselves and their families. So a lot of hardship being experienced. And this report is actually the second one we've done this year. The first one was more just putting a face to this, the victims of corruption, in this case the Fishrot scandal, by interviewing 13 affected people, mainly ex-workers, but also members of their families, which we published back in March. And then this was a follow-up report using a survey method to try and bring out some further findings about the levels of hardship that people have been going through. So it's very clear, it's sometimes it's said that corruption is a victimless crime, that you can't really identify who was harmed. But in this case, we have hundreds of workers and their families and their communities who we can identify as being harmed. And that, of course, helps us then put forward a case for some kind of restitution to come into place to assist those people, because it's so clear who was harmed and damaged by this.
Thank you, Graham, for that elaborate summary. Maybe just to get one thing out of the way, when the report got released this week, we have seen sentiments like, the timing is so suspicious, this is an attempt to undermine the outcome of this election again this year. If you can clarify that part.
Well, I hadn't actually seen those allegations, but it's a long-planned piece of work that we wanted to mark November the 13th as being the anniversary day of the Fishrot allegations coming out. But the second thing to say about this is that maybe there is a need to examine government and party figures in more detail, but this is not the purpose of that report. This report and the earlier report are focused actually on Iceland and on the company Samherji, and saying, what we are saying, look, there is a criminal trial ongoing in Namibia. We know it's happening very slowly. We don't want to interfere in that. It's sub judice. So at the moment, we're focusing our efforts on Iceland and the level of accountability and responsibility in Iceland, particularly in the company Samherji, which basically got off scot-free. Nothing has happened in Iceland since 2019. So it's not true to say that we're trying to target anybody with this. In Namibia, the focus is Iceland. But, on the other hand, corruption, and in Fishrot as the worst example of corruption in Namibia since independence, is always in people's minds. Yeah. And corruption will always be a voting issue. You only have to look at the reasons why we've had, elections that are either controversial or where there's been surprise results in the region. In Mozambique, it's a lot to do with corruption, allegations of corruption. In Mauritius, it was the same. Botswana, corruption was a key issue. So corruption will be an issue at elections, and that's just it. But there's nothing deliberate and nothing party political about the timing of this report.
Yeah. So the fact that you are referring to Iceland here, there was a remark, rather controversial, made, I can't remember when, but some time back by Vice President Netumbo Ndaitwa. She was addressing, I don't know what event, and she was blaming some unnamed foreigners for having used Namibians, as if to suggest that those that are charged in connection with this scandal were mere fronts, and that somehow guilt lies elsewhere. What is your interpretation of that?
Well, it's true up to a point. I mean, often in corruption, the people who take the bribes are the ones who are accused and end up in court, which is what's happened in this case. And the bribe givers get much less attention. And the bribe givers, were in Iceland in this case. And so I can see her point that, that side of the corruption equation, the bribe givers in Iceland have not really been focused on. But of course, they needed willing collaborators in Namibia to make this corruption scheme work. And, as we know, 10 people are arrested. Possibly or probably more people should have been arrested. There's more people than just 10 involved in this on the Namibian side. So it's not just a question of saying it's foreigners and that's it, but we have to accept our responsibility. We've done some things right. We've arrested some people. There's a court process. What's shocking, as to me, is that Iceland, which at the time Fishrot broke as a story, was regarded as one of the cleanest, least corrupt countries in the world, has sat on this issue now for 5 years. We hear there's an investigation going on, but none of the principals of Samheri have been charged, or anybody in Iceland. And why everything takes so long in Iceland is unclear. But so I think there is an imbalanced situation at the moment. More has happened in Namibia than has happened in the Northern Hemisphere, where we know many of these countries proclaim themselves to be, having good anti-corruption records, and are often lecturing us in the South and the Southern Hemisphere about corruption. So this reverses that. I mean, we need to lecture Iceland and Europe on this, because it's clearly not been taken seriously enough.
Yeah. Do you think the fact that in Namibia some actions have been taken, such as arresting those 10 men that you spoke about, what does that do to the credibility of particularly the ruling party and its government? Because at the time, people said, 2019, people say that the revelations dented Swapo's performance in that election. I know that people like Roland Brown, who came to my show recently, suggested that it would be naive to pin that performance on Fishrot alone. He said that there are many variables that actually contributed to that. But do you think government and Swapo itself have acquitted themselves well in this manner, to the extent that maybe some sort of faith is being restored with how they have acted so far?
Well, I think in the immediate aftermath, a lot was said by ruling party figures, including that they were going to self-correct and deal with that. And at least in public, we haven't seen a lot of evidence of that. There's tended to be, a move back into denial mode, and then, unfortunately, some of those who have been identified in the court documents as beneficiaries of Fishrot, or who played a key role in moving the money around, are still in prominent positions. Some of them are in the current National Assembly list. So, there hasn't been a lot of sign that Swapo has dealt with this. I think, that Fishrot probably had an effect on the last election, but the big sort of reveal actually that affected a lot of Namibians was the Al Jazeera documentary, Anatomy of a Bribe, which wasn't broadcast until after the election. So, I think that those visuals and that documentary had a lot of impact on Namibians. So I would agree with Roland that I was not the main factor in that election, but corruption is always an issue. Maybe why corruption might not be as such a big factor this time is that we haven't had a major corruption scandal, anything comparable to Fishrot in recent times.
Yeah.
So maybe there isn't so much focus on that, but I've been surprised at the lack of debate and discussion around corruption and anti-corruption policy in this election campaign. I thought Swapo could come forward and say, no, this is the way that we are correcting the situation. But we know they haven't touched the Marine Resources Act, which partially enabled Fishrot from giving the minister too much power. And then the other parties aren't really raising corruption as an issue on the campaign trail. So there hasn't been much about that, actually. And it seems to me that some missing, as many issues are not being discussed or covered properly in this election campaign, but corruption is one of them.
Yeah. In terms of the impact that Fishrot has had on these fishermen, I'm just reading your report here. On the employment and economic conditions, it says, for example, that almost 90% of these former workers have been unsuccessful in securing employment as fisheries workers or any other employment since losing their jobs due to Fishrot. That's one. And then over 80% of them say they rely on family and friends for assistance. And then we have 91% of these workers, former workers, saying questioned. Those that have been spoken to say they receive a monthly 4,000 payment via the government employment redress program that was instituted by government in 2020. When I was doing an election town hall meeting there in Walvis Bay in September, some of these fishermen were telling us that they have been, because they wanted to be reinstated into some of these companies, especially with this quota scheme that government introduced to say, we give you quotas on condition that you take up some of these guys. And some of them say that they have been given some jobs in the factories and what they're earning is much, much less than what they were making at sea. That's why they continue to demand that they be reinstated in sea jobs. What is your impression of this scheme, this intervention?
So I think the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources does deserve some credit. That does seem to be making a difference for a lot of the workers, at least. It's assisting them, that it's not enough and it's not comparable to actually the quite good wages they were getting when they were on the vessels some years back. But it's not just for the workers affected by Fishrot, it's for quite a number of categories of workers who've lost their jobs over the years. So I do think the ministry is trying to help and it's appreciated. So as I say, we're not blaming the ministry on this particular issue. I mean, there's a lot about the need for reform in the fisheries policy area, but in terms of identifying and trying to help these particular workers, that government intervention is obviously a welcome move.
And there's also this, because you spoke about the notion out there that somehow corruption doesn't have victims. But when you look at this report, for example, even on a social level, economic level is one thing, but even socially, people are talking about, 36% of them saying that they've been separated from their girlfriends or wives or partners, while 55% report having their extended relations disrupted due to being long-term, due to being unemployed for some time. So clearly the facets are a lot. I mean, men traditionally in Africa, we ought to be providing for our partners and whatnot, and when you can't provide anymore, they tend to leave you.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of breakdown of families as a result of this. As you say, men, particularly in that society, see themselves as they should be the breadwinners, and they feel humiliated to some extent that they've been put in this situation. When we had the workers speaking at our event this week, one of them got up and said, "You might think I'm very well dressed and looking okay, but it's because my wife does everything for me now. She gets my clothes because I can't provide anything for the family, but she works." So that's a role reversal that many men find hard to deal with. So a lot of families and relationships are broken up, and also alcohol abuse and to some extent gender-based violence have arisen from this as well, from the frustrations that people are feeling. So
yeah, there were talks of suicides also at some.
Yeah, so we're still we're pinning that down because there's been several references to suicides, but we want to gather that kind of evidence in a very concrete way. But yes, there are references to suicide in the testimonies of the various workers.
Yeah, and there was also, I mean, in the articles that Namibians in the article that Namibian Sun published from this report, and I haven't seen it yet here, there was even an incident of somebody giving a testimony of having their child dropped out of university because they could no longer afford their tuition.
There's several examples of children, struggling to pay school fees, but also then children having to drop out of UNAM or NUST because the situation in the family changed and they couldn't afford the fees anymore. So these are very widespread effects of the corruption. And of course, when it's affecting a number of families, then it affects the community as well. We did spend time in going to the north this time because a number of workers couldn't afford to live in Walvis Bay anymore, so they moved back to their villages. So we attempted to trace some of them, and we interviewed some of them for this report, and they've also had similar problems, but really struggled since Fishrot took place.
Yeah. Maybe the final question on this subject, Graham, what is your impression of how the legal processes are unfolding in this matter? I mean, like you said, people were arrested exactly 5 years ago, the first accused. And to date, nothing concrete has come out of it. What do you pin that?
I'm aware that the prosecution has been ready for 2 years or more to go on this, and the delays have been brought by the suspects and their lawyers, but they're perfectly entitled in law to, as they have done, object to the judge, call for a division in the trial or whatever the current issues are that are delaying the process. So, yes, they're entitled to do that, even though that most of them, 9 out of the 10, are still behind bars. It is frustrating to see the wheels of justice grind so slowly, but the process has to go through, and we have to, the justice system has to hold firm and make sure there's a resolution here, because we can't afford for this to become some kind of mistrial or anything like that.
Yeah.
Just for the public faith in the system, justice has to be done. There has to be a resolution to this case, and of course that means the process has to go through. So, as I say, sub judice, so I'm not going to comment in any detail on this, but it is frustrating, and one hopes that progress will be made in 2025. But I do know, that the evidence is gathered, the prosecution is ready to go, and as soon as we can get properly into the trial phase and beyond the objections phase, then I'm sure we'll start to hear a lot of interesting evidence, and people will start to feel a bit more confident in the process.
There's been some theories, Graham, to the effect that part of delaying this trial was somehow designed to help Swapo cross over from the 27th of November, because there's this idea that some of these details that may emerge from the trial are so explosive that they may disadvantage the party. Do you think there's and apparently, supposedly, this is so these guys themselves are delaying the process so that they can go later to Swapo and say, look, we have helped you to win, if assuming Swapo wins, and therefore now it's your turn to repay us. What do you make of those kind of talks?
Well, I've heard similar talk, but that would mean that our justice system is completely compromised if that kind of allegation were true and that was the intention of the delays. Of course, it would have been damaging, particularly to the ruling party, if the trial had started in early 2024 and evidence had been coming out on a daily basis. So maybe it is fortuitous for the ruling party that hasn't happened, but I don't have any evidence that anything's been done deliberately. So, I think, and it would seriously begin to doubt our justice system if there was a sort of quid pro quo arrangement. We'll delay the trial, you make sure that we are released because of some technical issue in 2025. That would be absolutely shocking, and I don't think Namibian democracy would allow that to happen.
Yeah, and Swapo itself, because the party itself has been accused of being a beneficiary of this scandal. We have seen, for example, money sent from Fishrot under the title of government objectives, and it somehow ended up funding activities in Swapo. ACC sort of said, they have cleared Swapo, there's nothing, because the money did not formally reach the accounts of the party or it was endorsed by any formal structure of the party. But is that enough to simply say because it was not approved by Central Committee or Politburo, or that it didn't go through the formal accounts of the official account of the party, that somehow that exonerates the party?
I think I would like to wait and see what evidence is presented in the court. So that may be a factor in some of the evidence. Obviously, Marin de Klerk, as the alleged paymaster, has a crucial role here, and he's still unclear exactly what the state of the extradition process is at the moment, but still, absconded to South Africa and isn't here to face trial. So if that extradition could take place and he's brought back, then he would be a crucial part of this, because we need to see all the elements of the jigsaw.
Yeah.
And, I think, to be honest, I would just say to Swapo, it's in their own interest to clean house. So whatever ramifications might come out of Fishrot that affect them, they should clean up and clean house, and that will help to restore the reputation of the party.
Absolutely. We will go for a very short break, and then when we return, Graham and I will be looking at the outcome of the special voting that took place this week, and what it means for the actual election on the 27th of November. Don't go away.
Neo Paints has established a 67-year Namibian legacy, creating personalized paint solutions that blend quality and innovation for the Namibian people. We pride ourselves in being a 100% Namibian-owned company, investing in our country and our people by employing and empowering true Namibians. With every brushstroke, Neo Paints commits to our quality guarantee and always delivering a coat of excellence. At Neo Paints, we always stay true to our country. We are as Namibian as you.
continue with Graham Hopwood on the agenda, and now we want to really look into the outcome of the special voting process that took place this week. Graham, what was your first impression of what has come out so far? I know that some results might still be pending, because even this morning I was looking for some. Ruakana, I couldn't find it. Couldn't find Korihas and whatnot. But I think we've gotten enough to work with. What is your impression?
Well, yeah, about 16,000 votes across the foreign votes and then the special voting inside Namibia. That's about 1% of the registered voters. So, to be honest, it's not really a big enough sample to draw any conclusions with great confidence. And also because it's select groups of people, it's security or seagoing personnel or people who could get to the foreign missions abroad. So I'm hesitant to read too much into it, but there's some interesting aspects, which I suppose we can watch to see if those trends develop when the substantive results come out after November 27th. So, it's clear that the IPC and Dr. Ituro are emerging as a sort of front-runner challenger to Swapo and its presidential candidate. However, Swapo also seems to be doing quite well in some respects. It's interesting that Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah is in many instances beating the party. So her vote share is quite comfortable. The party is not so obviously above 50%, or not far above 50%. So, somebody connected to the party said to me last weekend that they are worried that because she's respected and well known, that Netumbo's vote will be quite solid. But the people who are frustrated with the party in different ways will punish the party by switching their vote to another party, an opposition party. And the slight indications of that, but again, we have to see if it develops. And then I suppose the other group that will be encouraged by these results are affirmative repositioning, because they seem to have emerged as a third place party and currently anyway are eclipsing the LPM and the PDM. But I do add a qualification that this is very early, so we can't really say this is going to develop on polling day and when the results come out, we have to see. But yeah, there's a few interesting things we can comment on, but nothing really that we can say, put forward a national projection and say, oh, this is likely to be happening in the actual main election on November 27th. So I would be hesitant to draw any major conclusions out of it, but some interesting factors. A lot of parties just registering 0 votes and candidates as well. So, which maybe means the field is just too big, and we need to find ways of trimming that down in future by having thresholds and things to make it, to get more serious candidates and parties coming forward. But so it's an interesting discussion starter. But I wouldn't say there's any great conclusions to draw at the moment.
Yeah. To what do you attribute AR's sort of performance, really starting from nothing as a pressure group previously, and now registered as a political party, and suddenly they seem to be on the basis, of course, of this small sample. They're already outshining major, old, established parties. What about AR that seems to have galvanized people around it?
So they've been around since 2015, quite prominent social media and also in the news. Professor Ampanda, and then also the AR as a movement as it was before it was a party. So there's quite a bit of knowledge and name recognition. And also I just think that they are probably appealing to the younger voters as a more radical option. I put forward radical solutions for Namibia's issues like unemployment and so on. They've been quite good on corruption. Professor Mpanda's had quite a few successes in terms of raising red flags about issues. So I know he's presented himself in the party as quite effective in what they do. So maybe that's being recognised. But let's see if it continues, because I always remember the 1989 election. I was in London, actually in the Houses of Parliament, a group of sort of anti-apartheid Swapo supporters were there listening to the BBC World Service, because that's the only means we had about the election results. And all the early results were pro-DTA because they were coming from the small settlements in the south. And everybody was starting to panic. And then, the big results came in later from Ovamboland. And those big rural constituencies like in Omasati and Ohangwena, they're the ones where we have to wait and see. If those voting patterns have changed significantly there might be some different kind of outcome from usual. But if they're sticking more or less to their traditional loyalties, then I think we're likely to see Swapo still in the governing position next year. So one always has to be patient with these things and wait for all the results to be in before you can really make a determination.
Yeah. In the south, Swapo is doing well, actually, surprisingly, far better than LPM, which we thought is the party that is, is currently the ruling party that side. Is it because we have, because the people who voted are mostly your soldiers and police officers, and there's been this idea, this argument for the longest of times that these people are usually, that the police force and defense force are predominantly Oshivambo people that are there. It has been complained a lot that it must be more inclusive. Do you think, for example, that maybe there was a tribal element, maybe ethnic alignment in how soldiers in that part of the country and police officers voted? Or how did LPM lose ground like that?
Yeah, so one has to remember that the soldiers and the police are stationed in places in the south, but not necessarily hailing from those regions originally. That is the nature of their assignments. So it could be that they have allegiances to other parties, and so as a result of that, again, let's not read too much into it, because it could mean that the LPM will do a lot better in the general voting, and which would reflect more the if you like, the indigenous or the local populations. So that's why we have to be very cautious about reading too much into this, because it's security and it's police and soldiers primarily. So it's they might have particular trends and patterns of voting which don't reflect in the national picture.
Yeah. The fact that everybody that voted inside the country in this election, special voting, Graham, is someone with a job. There's not a single person who voted inside the country who is unemployed. Do you think that when unemployed people start voting on the 27th, especially young people, that may also radically shift what we've seen? What is your view on that?
Yeah, so another reason for not taking these results too seriously is that factor that it doesn't. The unemployed and those who are suffering economically might have a very different approach to who they support. I mean, if they turn out at all, because sometimes poor people are just playing a survival game and they might not even have the energy to go and queue up for several hours at polling stations. So, yeah, that's probably a factor, but it's a factor to say let's not get carried away with any implications that we can really draw and project onto the national vote. Although, as I say, it's interesting to discuss some of the aspects of the special voting. I don't think it's ultimately that conclusive about what will happen at the end of the day.
Yeah. In places like Cape Town and London, where we saw IPC winning ahead of Swapo, what is your reading into that?
Not so sure about London, but obviously the biggest single place in terms of the numbers turning up several hundred was Cape Town, and I think it's probably students, and so they outweigh the official consulate or embassy staff or whatever. So it could be an indication, as we would expect, that the younger vote is more fluid. It's not as fixed on traditional party loyalties. So one thing that I think might be a factor of this election is that maybe people aren't full on IPC or Itula supporters, but they've sort of identified them as the main challenger, and therefore if they want to register a protest vote, they might end up with that package, and maybe that's an indication from Cape Town. But as I say, let's see what happens. The numbers in terms of constituencies and regions are going to be, the Commerce region, the coast, and then the far north. And these once we see numbers coming in from those constituencies, we'll have a much better sense of what might be happening in this election.
Yeah. Do you feel that against that very point that you mentioned about people being more liberal in their outlook, do you think that that will play a role now, a huge role in this election going forward? There was this paper by Roland Brown again where he analyzed the outcomes of elections, and he said that there's been a small evolution in the voting patterns of people. Somehow that economic factors now play a major role in deciding who to vote for. He spoke about the 2019 election, and when things were just not well economically, and somehow people wanted to send out a clear message that we are not happy with the status quo. Do you think we are now entering into that era now where people really look at issues rather than just blind loyalty?
Yeah, or maybe just their living conditions and whether they've got enough money in their pocket to get by. So what happened, I think, after independence is that the Swapo had a strong reputation as the liberation movement. It was the party that brought independence. There were liberation heroes in the party, and that was a big factor for a lot of voters through the 1990s and quite a bit of the 2000s. But obviously over time, and it happens to all former liberation movements, the allure of that period tends to fade because we get young people now, most of the younger voters, to have no memory of the liberation struggle and have even not much knowledge about what happened before 1990. So they're going to base their decisions on, do I have a job? Do I have career prospects? Do I have chances of a decent education? Can my family, get enough income to put food on the table? That these are the if you like, the bread and butter issues that people are going to be voting on more and more. So there will be that residual loyalty to Swapo because of history, but over time it gets less and less, and the party has to accommodate that and work out strategies to overcome that. And that's why I think their slogan is a bit, that we have delivered, trust us to deliver more, is a bit, quite weak, to be honest, because a lot of people will say, but we haven't really seen you deliver that much, so what are you promising us? Just more of the same. And even some of the leading figures have said, we're just going to do the same in the future as we've done in the past. And they don't seem to have learned that lesson. They need to project a sense of more urgency that they're going to tackle the socioeconomic issues in Namibia with a much more deeper sense of commitment than they have in the past.
Yeah. Speaking of Swapo, Graham, the messaging troubles me a little bit because clearly, and evidence on the ground suggests that there's a lot of things that are not well. Unemployment, levels of poverty, the deteriorating infrastructure that were inherited and were just supposed to be kept in good conditions. Hospitals, for example, Katutura there. And I thought a party like that would say, look, especially when you have a new leader coming in, because you can always tell us that, look, this leader is different. She admits that things are not well, and this is her commitment. But when you keep preaching that somehow, patting yourself on the back and saying our records speak for itself, it is as if you do not recognize that something is wrong. And that scares me because it doesn't then tell me that you are actually going to rectify things that are wrong when you don't seem to acknowledge that there's something wrong.
So it's a mentality issue that the party seems to have problems acknowledging, and as I've said before, self-correcting. Fishrot is one example, but you would have thought that a little bit more contrition about failures in the past and real expressions of determination to turn things around will go better with the voters. But one senses in Swapo that they don't want to admit any weakness at all, any possible mistakes that they've made, and that they are just wonderful and they will continue to be wonderful, and that is it. And as you say, that seems to be the wrong kind of messaging, really, that they should be putting across, because I think the voters would like to get a sense that they are going to tackle issues with much more seriousness and urgency. You know, it's not all bleak for them. They've got some good things they can report. Like, for example, I'm sure the exponential rise in the old age pension has really benefited not just old people, but a lot of families. So in absence of a basic income grant, I mean, that's the nearest we have in terms of a very far-reaching social protection program. So, you know, there are some areas where they can point to achievements, but there would also need to be, in a sense, we've done some things right. We've realised we've moved in certain areas, and we've also been hamstrung by financial issues, but we're definitely going to do things a lot better in the future, rather than just continuing at the same level.
Yeah. The fragmentation, the supposed fragmentation of the opposition, because everybody is saying, oh no, the opposition could really push Swapo if it was united, but now it's too fragmented. And my counter argument to that has been to say that even when you look at this outcome of the special voting, the fragmentation I don't see it as benefiting Swapo in any way, because there are places where, for example, I can't remember which foreign mission had 19 votes, and 9 of those belong to Netumbo or to Swapo, but the other 10 are fragmented within the opposition, and by that logic, Swapo is in the minority.
Yeah, so that's why, you know, these arguments the opposition should unite don't always make a lot of sense. It's because of our proportional representation system. So if you have a lot of smaller parties, even ethnic-based parties, and a lot of them are only getting 1, 2 or 3%, and then you have 2 or 3 bigger parties, the combined effect could be, as in some of these results, to bring Swapo below 50%. Even though when you first look at the results, Swapo has a much bigger figure than almost all the others. So, you know, that's the thing, that you have AR as a new party, IPC as a new party, then you have the residual support for existing parties already. Combined, it could push the Swapo vote down towards 50. We don't know what's going to happen, but you know, we don't have any polling, so you know, everybody's in a guessing game at the moment. But these are the combined factors in a PR system of having a lot of opposition, and if you put them together, they actually could undermine that possibility of Swapo getting over 50%. But as I say, I'm not predicting that, because we don't have enough evidence at the moment.
Yeah. The other surprising result, to me at least, was, again, we are working with a very small sample, we admit that, but Walvis Bay, the way it came out, with IPC still retaining the majority of the votes there. What is your reading of that? Because I thought, with all these interventions, for example, you spoke about the initiative by the Minister of Fisheries to help some of these fishermen. Is it still those scandals? Do you think is still because of those scandals that somehow people are still unhappy and they seem to be looking for an alternative, or is this? What is your reading?
Well, yeah. I mean, if the Statistics Agency had released the unemployment statistics, we could have seen how bad unemployment is in Walvis Bay. But you know, it's a big settlement now, and so there will be a lot of unemployed people, not just in the fisheries sector, but also beyond that. So, you know, if we're saying that the economic factors that might be the predominant drivers in terms of how people decide who to vote for, that's probably a big issue. And then I'm finding it difficult to gauge how people perceive the performance of the IPC in terms of being in charge of the councils at the coast. There seems to be some people who think they've done well and others who think they've done badly. So I'm not quite sure how that will impact on the eventual vote. But the urban areas are going to be the areas where the vote is more changeable, where there are more floating voters who might switch their votes. And one is picking up from these results that quite a lot of people are splitting their votes. They're voting for a presidential candidate from a party that's different from the party they vote for, which is interesting. And so it's almost like people are voting tactically in some ways.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be a really interesting election. I think that's one thing that we could say from these results, but we can't jump to any immediate conclusions about the final outcome.
Yeah. That's why for me the Rongo results surprised me a little bit, because there seems to be a lot of discontent within Walvis Bay itself. Crime, the crime rate there is so bad. I'm told that the roads are also very bad there. Of course, some of the things are also things that you can pin on the central government, because crime, for example, is a territory of the police, and the police are central government duty, part of central government. Although, I don't know if they have some. I think they have some sort of. I don't know if they have some sort of city police within Walvis Bay that could also curb. I know they have traffic police, definitely. But Swakopmund, people seems to be very satisfied. The feedback that I'm getting is that it's really a well-run town, but Walvis Bay is a complete opposite of that. But somehow, when I saw the results, I was surprised that somehow people in Walvis Bay itself seems to have had seem to be giving IPC another opportunity, at least with this small sample. We don't know whether they will maintain the same in the main election. But you mentioned unemployment, Graham. What is your take on NSA, Namibia Statistics Agency, not publicizing that information? Because it's so convenient that somehow, after all the similar reports contained an element of that, just this one doesn't have that.
We need robust independent institutions in Namibia, and we're struggling to develop them really. And I really had the hope that the NSA, when it broke out of the National Planning Commission, what used to be the Central Bureau of Statistics, would really establish its independence. So it was incredibly disappointing when they chose to do that. I do think it's undermined their reputation as an independent body. They should completely ignore the political and electoral calendar and release their surveys and the findings according to their arranged schedule, and that's the way they should operate, and they shouldn't be put under pressure by anybody. So we know that the unemployment figures were a standard feature in previous main census reports, so it's very damaging, I think, for their own reputation that they chose to do that.
Yeah. Maybe in conclusion, Graham, the looking forward beyond November 27, what should happen to the country? What are the key responsibilities and even priorities of whoever emerges as a winner in that election? Because we seem to really, personally, I think we have regressed in many ways. Because, for example, unemployment, it's one thing for unemployment to slip a percent or two back. It happens even in major economies. But when it exponentially increases to the extent that is rumored, and that we know, of course, the last official statistics that we have, those are huge. That, for me, is a sign of a society regressing. The levels of poverty, for me, have also really gone up, because I keep saying this example of when I drove in Katutura many years ago, there was never people selling lollipops at traffic lights and endangering their lives, and people the number of beggars now on the streets at the traffic lights has increased. Those for me are signs of a society in reverse gear. What must happen?
Well, first of all, I really hope that we have free and fair elections and the result is respected, because we can't afford, anything like a Mozambique situation, where there's some kind of unrest post-election. Because although some people say it's a cliche, our peace and stability does give us an advantage over many countries and gives us a platform from which to advance the development of the country. But yes, I do think we're in a situation now where the problems facing us, the socioeconomic challenges, have become increasingly urgent, and whichever government comes into power is going to have to change its approach and really implement much better and much more effectively than the past governments, because otherwise, we do risk the possibility of greater social unrest and other negative issues coming up in the future. So it's becoming urgent now, and unfortunately, the things that are on are the prospects for Namibia at the moment, which is green hydrogen development, probably first, and then oil and gas later. There might be money into the fiscus ultimately. Government might have more money, but they're not going to be mass employment generators. So we might still be struggling with the fundamental problems of failing to create jobs and therefore failing to raise incomes, and things dragging on, possibly getting worse. So I believe that if you're in politics, it should be about public service. I think we've got way too many politicians who are just trying to serve themselves and fill their own pockets. And if we could get a change in that mentality, whoever comes into Parliament next year, then they've got a much better chance of delivering some real benefits to the people. But that's a big mindset change that we need to get all the parties to address.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Thank you, Graham, for coming on.
Okay, cheers, thanks a lot.
Yeah, wonderful. That's Graham Hopwood is the Executive Director of the Institute for Public Policy Research, IPPR, filling us in on the election prospects, and of course also commenting on the content of the report that analyzes the impact of the Fishrot scandal 5 years after it emerged, especially on the fishermen who lost their jobs. Thank you for watching.